based on their arc. The other method that you don't really need to know too much about the specific area method, it's a little different than the total area. It's not one they really rely on too much. The total area is one. The single head method is another one that they rely on. And basically you can look at the precipitation rate for one head. And what it takes into consideration at the bottom of page 119 is the gallonage coming out of that one head, and you're dividing it by the degrees of the arc. So it takes into consideration if it's a 90, if it's a 180, or if it's a 360, and you're multiplying it by the head spacing times the row spacing. So it takes into consideration the actual spacing. So it's similar in a way, but it's isolating one head. And that's what it's looking at. So we'll work through some of those as well. The final method that you want to be worried about or be concerned with, and as far as studying and getting to know, is the drip area method, or the drip irrigation method. And that's different because it's drip. It's based on the precipitation rate of drip irrigations of emitters. It's based on their spacings. So it's got its own formula, and last I heard they asked a couple of questions on that one to make sure that we have an understanding of how the drip works. So let's look at the formulas, let's write them up there, let's kind of work through the examples that, or maybe create some examples of what precipitation rates can and cannot do. So if you get a chance before Thursday, look at that application and just see if it makes sense, or if you're up against a total roadblock, maybe we'll try and do something different. Okay, the precipitation rate for total area is 96.3. 96.3 is the given. In the formula world, it's something that they give you. If you want to ask questions about where it came from, that's fine. Do it on your own time. It's not that big a deal. Accept it. 96.3. It's what you've got to put in that formula. There is a calculation to it, and it's long and drawn out. But just remember, 96.3 times your gallons per minute in the area, and you're going to divide that by the total area. Total area is basically length times width. So, let's say we've got 4 heads. Okay, so we've roped off this area. Let's say it's 15 by 15. We're using 15-foot heads. Okay, so there's 15 foot here, and there's 15 foot here. Now these heads are all 4 gallon per minute heads. It's out in the middle of the yard, they're full circle. So 15 foot full puts out 4 gallons per minute. Now when we look at the area that we're talking about, how much water is in here, is in that square? Well, if you look at it and you think, oh, well, there's 4 heads, 4 gallons per minute, 16 gallons. No. Not all 4 gallons is going in that square. Because this is a quarter of what that head is throwing.
1 gallon per minute.
Each head is contributing 1 gallon per minute to the area. Okay? So it's a total of 4 gallons. It's a coincidence, okay, because they're 4 gallons per minute head, it's just a coincidence. But what you're after is how much is each head putting into the area that is in question. So you've got to know it's a 4 gallon head, it's putting 1 in because it's a quarter. If we did a bigger area where we had 3 heads across, and let's say it's 15 by actually 30, so that'd be 15 by 15, 30. You have a quarter here, putting 1 in. This would be a half because it's 180, so it'd be putting 2 in. So does it kind of make sense how you come up with the gallonage that would be in an area? It's not the gallonage of the head, it's the gallonage that is contributing to that area. Okay, so the total gallons for this one is 1 for each head for a total of 4 gallons. Okay, so you got 96.3 times your 4 gallons, and then you divide it by your total area. Length times width. So 15 by 15. So 96.3 times 4 gallons is gonna give us 385.2, did I get that right?
Mhm.
And what is that, 450 on the bottom? Is that right, 15 by 15?
225.
225, okay. That's why I need a calculator. And a new pen. So you take the 385.2 and divide it by the 225, and it comes up with 1.71. What the 1.71 is, 1.71 inches per hour. So based on those heads being spaced at 15 foot, and see, that may change because you may have squeezed your heads like we did in some spots to where instead of a 15-foot head, it may be going 14 foot. So your square footage changes. And I bet you that precipitation rate goes up because they're closer together. But based on the spacing of 15 by 15 and 4 gallon per minute full heads, all throwing a gallon in, 1.71 inches per hour. So if we turn the sprinkler on and let it run an hour, there's gonna be almost 2 inches of water put in that area. That's probably not gonna be real good because it's gonna run off. It's too much water. So based on that, we can back into it and say, okay, we need to put down 1/2 inch of water. So you could take, let's see if I can remember to do this right. Okay, so you've got, if you had 1.71 inches per hour and you divide it by 60, that's gonna be 0.03 per minute. And basically, let's just say if you said 20 minutes in there, it's gonna give you 0.57 inches in a 20 minute period. So you have your half an inch in about 20 minutes. So that's where some of this, the why do we need precipitation rate? What does it matter? That helps us decide how we want to set the time on the controller. Because at some point, we need to be able to figure out what are we putting down? We're putting down plants, we're putting down shrubs, we're putting down Bermuda, St. Augustine, and they all have a little bit difference, especially when it comes to hot, dry, humid in the middle of August in Texas. So if we have to put down 0.25 inches per day replenishment, and the last time we watered, let's say, was Monday, and it's Wednesday, Wednesday, we need to put down 1/2 inch. So when it comes up on Wednesday to water, we need to go water 20 minutes to replenish what is evaporated, what is transpired through plant takeoff and usage, okay? That's why they want us to know a little bit about precipitation rate. Is it confusing? Oh, yeah. But it's a matter of plug and play. Get the formula in your head. We'll go through some examples. I've got some sheets we'll work, as we get closer to the end. But just remember, 96.3 times your gallons per minute. Your gallons per minute is based on the amount that's being put into the area, and then your total area, which is length times width. Okay, that's total area. That's looking at a space, not just one head. Single head, single head method is 34,650 times the GPM of one head. And that's, arc of the head times head spacing by row spacing. Okay, so 34,650 times gallons per minute of one head, the degrees of the arc times head spacing times row spacing. Okay, let's plug in some numbers there. 34,650 is the given. There again, if you wanna figure it out, I think there's an explanation in the book where it comes from, but it's a given. The guys in the trench coats or the white lab jackets have figured it all up, so don't worry. It's a part of the formula. 34,650 times the gallons per minute of one head, let's say it's that same 15-foot full that we had a minute ago. So we're gonna say 4 gallons. 34,650 times the 4 gallons out of that 15-foot full spray head. Now, the arc, if it's a full, if it's out in the middle of the yard, it's 360 degrees. So you'll take 360 times, and the spacing we said was 15 by 15. So we're doing the same thing on one of those 4 heads we looked at a minute ago to see what the individual head precipitation rate is. So 34,650 times 4 is 138,600. And then on the bottom, you've got 360 degrees of arc times 15 times 15, which puts 81,000 up there. Some crazy numbers. But you take the 138,600 and divide it by 81,000. And guess what you come up with? 1.71. So it's pretty accurate across the two different methods of checking it. So that head, you've got 4 because you've got them spaced equally at 15 by 15. If you have them stretched, now your precipitation rate's gonna drop. It's not gonna be that good. If you squeeze them, it's probably gonna be a little bit higher. But because you've got them at 15 by 15, you were using 15-foot heads on that other example, it's all kind of the same, so your precipitation rate is the same. So the one head in the middle of the yard, whichever one you want to pick, 4 gallon per minute full with 360
inches per hour too?
That's inches per hour. So an area, total area method versus one single head. I don't know if I need to erase it or not. Y'all get it all? Okay. All right, so the final method is gonna be the drip method, because there's so adamant about saving water and conserving water, they're gonna ask questions about the drip method. So let's be prepared to use it. The drip method, now it's 231.1 times gallons per hour of an emitter. That's the output. Remember, emitters are in gallons per hour instead of gallons per minute. And it's based on emitter spacing times the row spacing. So when you do drip, remember when we laid it out in the flower beds the other day, we came, about every foot, we just made a straight line. So you're making a matrix basically. And when you buy the tubing, it will be on, the tubing will be rated as so many gallons per hour out of the emitters, and the emitters spacing. So it may be 0.6, which is just a little over half a gallon per hour, at a 12-inch spacing, or 0.9, which is just under 1 gallon per hour, at 18-inch spacing. So that's the numbers that you'll plug in there. So when you look at it, if you've got 231.1 times the gallons per hour of emitter, let's just say it's the 0.9, the bigger the heavier, 0.9 gallons per hour, and we're gonna say our emitters are at a 12-inch, so it's, and this is in inches, 12 inches times the row spacing. We're gonna space the rows, because emitters are at 12 inside the tubing, we're gonna separate the rows every 12, so it'll be 12-inch spacing as well. Okay, so 231.1 times 0.9 is going to give us 207.99. $207.99, and we're going to divide that by the 12 by 12, which is 144. 207.99 times 144, or divided by 144, is 1.44. Is that right?
I got it.
Yeah, 1.44 inches per hour. So it's putting out quite a bit of water. So if you're in a flower bed and you've got a azalea that needs a gallon of water a day in June, July, and August, and you're putting out in an hour's time 1.1, 1.5, or a little bit more than, or a little bit less than that, you're probably going to need to be watering. 30 minutes is going to put you at 0.7, so about 45 minutes maybe to get a gallon of water back on it. So, I'm getting a new phone, I'm crazy, so trying to learn it. All right, so the three methods: total area, single head, and drip. Those are precipitation rates. We will be asked to do some of that on the exam, so be prepared. I'll have a worksheet. We may do it tonight, but just at least wanted to get it out there and kind of get y'all thinking about it. Know that the stuff on page 118, 119, 120 is pretty important when it comes to those formulas. Okay, make you some study cards, get to know the determination. Have you spent much time working on actual head pressure and design pressure as far as the definitions? Okay, that's what we're going to get to when it comes to hydraulics. Those are the numbers that we're looking for to figure out if things work like they should, to figure out how much pressure loss we have. Those are some definitions. Hopefully, if you haven't, go back and make a card on them. But those are the definitions that we'll definitely need to remember, because actual head pressure is you take your static and you subtract total losses, come up with actual head pressure, which is pressure at the base of the head. And if we know that we've got 50 pounds at the base of the head, the manufacturer says that it takes 25 to work, then we're good.
All these cards I made back when I took the
Yeah.
last class. your cars that
Put them on your pillow and let them absorb at night, I mean, whatever it takes, I mean, 'cause they're, you know, it makes it easier when, you know,
Yeah.
if you kinda got a leg up on the definitions rather than, you know, okay, well, multiple choice, I got a 1 in 4 chance. I mean, you know, so I mean, it's just gonna help, so, that's where some of that time spent outside class is gonna pay off and working on through the definitions and stuff. The definition for, design pressure is, sum total of all your losses plus what the manufacturer says they need to make the head work. And basically what we're looking for with design pressure is what we need to make this design work. We're looking at basically the worst case. So we'll look at the furthest head away from the meter, all these kind of things, all the things that come into play. We'll find the total loss, and, it's kind of like we're doing the design without checking pressure before we do it. So if you do the design, give the plan to the crew goes out to the job and they say design pressure is 62 pounds. They go to check the pressure with a pressure gauge and find out they got 58. They better make a phone call because it ain't working. 58 ain't 62. You're 4 pounds short and the system's probably not gonna work adequately. So, that's kind of when it comes to hydraulics, that's kind of the numbers we're looking for in the definitions while we are, you know, gonna be working through them to see, you know, what losses are, what losses we incurred, and what we've got left. Okay, and that's part of what starts coming up in the next part of chapter 5. We've already gone over the head spacing and kind of how to make things work in the next several pages there. Keep in mind that when you're looking at an area, you want to take the short side, get the spacing there, then do the long side. And basically, you're gonna take the length of the width, whichever one, and divide it by the size of the nozzle that you think will fit. Always try and go with the larger nozzle if possible. It will eliminate extra heads. You know, get some, you don't wanna stretch heads, but I mean, if you can make a 15-foot work instead of 10s, you're gonna have less heads. So always try and use the largest nozzle possible. Take your length or your measurement, divide by that, and it comes up with a number. A lot of times it's not gonna be a whole number. Round up, you always round up. Go take that number that you come up with, that whole number, and divide back into your distance. That'll tell you how far those heads are apart. So, you know, unless you come up with a whole number, you're gonna have to go back in and get an even spacing. So just keep that in mind. We've done that the last several times we've met. We were looking at head spacing, those head spacing exercises, and then the layout. So, I know it's not a huge thing for the test because a lot of that was based on that design that we did. But they may ask a question or two about, you know, head spacing and how you come up with the measurements, to do that and the different styles, whether it's square spacing or triangular spacing. And pretty much what we did was the square spacing. We laid out the drip. Okay, let's look at page 132. We'll talk about pipe sizes. That's one thing we haven't done on the design yet. We'll talk about it, and we might pull them out and size it. That is on our list. Okay, talks about sizing components, and the first thing it talks about is sizing pipe. Remember, early on in the definitions, we talked about velocities. Velocity for PVC pipe is to be kept at or below 5 feet per second. Okay, do you remember where we find those numbers? Okay, you go to the chart. You go to the pipe chart, whether it's copper or PVC, remember you've got two columns. You've got a velocity column and you've got a PSI loss column. Under each size pipe, remember across the top's half, 3/4, 1 inch, 1 1/4 inch, 1/2 to 2 inch, and those are the only sizes they're going to ask you about. Down the side, it's got the gallons per minute, up to 100. And under each size pipe, there are the two columns. Left is velocity, PSI loss is on the right. We will need the PSI loss when we do the hydraulic calculations, okay? Right now, if we're talking about friction loss, or if we're talking about velocity, we need the left-hand column. So if you look at, let's say, half-inch pipe, and you look at that velocity column, the good things about the chart, they've kind of got a limit there. If you look, there's a black line on each column underneath the size of pipe. It's at different points, but if you look at the half-inch and you look under the velocity column and just scroll down till you hit that line, the number you should see is 4.78. That's less than 5, correct?
Right.
Okay, the next number below it is over 5. So, somewhere in the mix between 6 and 7 gallons per minute is that mark of 5 feet per second. Well, we're not gonna get that detailed, because you could actually figure it out if you wanted to, but we're not gonna be at 6.25 gallons, so we're just gonna drop down to 6 gallons. So we haven't crossed that black line, we're at 4.78 feet per second. 6 gallons is where our maximum volume is for half-inch pipe, based on the rule that says velocity of no more than 5 feet per second through pipe, through PVC. So if you look at the 3/4, you do the same thing. Find the velocity column, scroll down until you hit the black line, the heavy line. The areas underneath the lines are kind of shaded, but if you look at it, you see 4.72. It's not at 5, it's right up next to it. And if you look over to the left, you should see 10 gallons per minute. So half-inch pipe, you get 6, 3/4, you can run up to 10. That's not an additional 10 gallons, that's total 10. Because what's happening when you set your valve and you size things, you start with a bigger size, and as you work towards the end, you downsize. You drop the size of the pipe. People say, well, you do that to gain pressure. No, you don't. That is so far from true. You lose pressure as you go through pipe, as you move water through pipe. So the only reason you downsize is for economics. Half-inch pipe is a lot cheaper than 3/4, 3/4 is a lot cheaper than 1-inch. That's why people downsize. Now, theoretically, don't do this on the exam, don't say Larry told you to do it, but theoretically, if you wanted to put a sprinkler system in and run 1-inch valves, you could run all 1-inch pipe. Hydraulically, it works, and it works well. But if you're paying 17 cents a foot for 1-inch pipe, when you could be running half-inch pipe at 10 cents a foot, there's 7 cents a foot difference. Depending on how many feet you've got, it could add up. So the reason people downsize is to save money. So you can run 6 gallons per minute through half, 10 through 3/4. If you look at the 1-inch chart and scroll down it, you should get down to 4.9 before you get to the black line, and that shows 17 gallons per minute. So most residential, if you're using 1-inch pipe, 1-inch valves, you're gonna run about 17 gallons per minute if you have it through the meter. That's what you can run. Now, you get into a situation, if you start getting into bigger pipe, if it's a commercial job, you may have to, but if you start getting into bigger pipe, you've got a 1-inch valve, and then you've got to figure out how to plumb it with 1.25 inch pipe. So it kind of makes things a little bit, if you run more than 17 gallons a minute. A 1-inch valve will handle almost 30 gallons. But you're gonna have, it's gonna look kind of funny, you got big pipe going to a small valve and then back up to big pipe. So most of the time, contractors will stay at 1-inch, they'll stay at about 17 gallons, 16, 17 gallons coming out of it, and size the pipe accordingly. Okay, so sizing pipe is based on this velocity. You should, after you do it long enough, you should just, it'll click. Half-inch is 6, 3/4 is 10, 1-inch is 17, 1.25 inch is 24, 1.5 inch is 35. It should just click, okay? But for now, reference the chart. It's there. They give it to us. If they ask you a question on there in the design portion, what's the maximum velocity of 1-inch pipe? And they give you 4 choices. Don't guess. Go to the chart and look at it. It's right there, okay? The So they'll give you the chart for the test, so use it every chance you get. 2 points, maybe 2 points. But when you look at copper's at 9 feet per second, and the chart for copper is the same way. It's the last one in the booklet. It's actually got a heavier colored section underneath the dark line, but, if you look down, through there, velocity under 3/4, you should see that you can get to about 12 gallons per minute before you get over, the black line. So 3/4 inch copper, you can run 12 gallons per minute. 1 inch copper, you can run up to 20 gallons per minute. And remember, the copper kind of comes into play on that service line. What's feeding the meter. When we do our available water, that's what we look at, no more than 9 feet per second velocity when we do our available water capacity. So, that's another reason, another place to look in that chart to find the velocity is for the copper. Now, an irrigation system is made up of service line, which feeds the meter. There's the main line, which goes from the meter to all the valves, and the main line is under constant pressure. Because when your valves shut off, they hold back the water pressure, and everything on the back side is, if you were to take a shovel and stick it in the ground real hard and you hit the main line, you're probably gonna get wet. No? You might not until later, but the main line is under constant pressure, so just be aware of that. That's why it's marked differently on the plan. It's a dashed line rather than a solid line. Your lateral lines are on the discharge side of the valves to the heads. Once the valve shuts off, pressure bleeds down. There may be some water in the pipe, but it's not under pressure. So if you hit it, you probably bubble up some water, but it wouldn't be a deal where it's steadily flowing.
On the valve, before they put the water meter, they just have a valve on the 1 inch pipe. I thought it was welded. I mean, the 1 inch pipe to the valve, because it's got a valve in there before they put the meter anyway.
Okay.
And
yeah, that's a cutoff for the city, right?
Yeah. And I thought it was welded. It's not. It just stuck in there with pressure.
Yeah. Maybe what they call sharp bite fitting is a newer system or older one?
It's probably an older one because that subdivision is, I don't know, probably 20 years old.
Some cities use polyethylene, a black service line, to the back of the meter, and that might have used a insert fitting or might have used a compression fitting of sorts.
I think that's what they use on that subdivision. I got on the top of it with my skid steer, turning, took the whole bottom off of it. Man, it was a job to put it back in it.
I bet it was, water running everywhere, right? So,
it had a lot of pressure. I mean, pretty much all the meters, they're 1 inch pipes.
yeah.
Pretty much I run taller anyway.
Yeah. So, just keep in mind that, when you see a main line, it's gonna be under pressure. The lateral lines will not be, and the service line usually is, it can be copper, it can be, polyethylene, it can be PEX, but the service line is on the back side of the meter. So, just be aware of what they are, and all pipe needs to be based on that velocity. He says underneath the main line, in sizing it, it is generally the largest pipe in the irrigation system. The main line is going to be based on the largest, it's going to be sized based for the largest section. So if you've got 11 zones, which we haven't counted the gallons and sized them that way, but if we've got 11 zones, and you've got 2 that are 12, 2 that are 14, 2 that are 16, and 1 that's 18, the main line better be sized to service the 18 gallon per minute zone. So it's gonna be based on what your largest demand is. So when you look at it, you get them all sized and calculated, look and see which one is the largest, and that's what you have to size your main line on. So typically you don't want to, because it would be uneconomical, you want your zones to all be similar in size. And if you're looking at staying below, our 1 inch valves, you want to stay below that 17 gallons per minute so that you can run a 1-inch main line. If you use a 1-inch valve and you run 24 gallons through it, then you're gonna have to have an 1.25 main line to the valve. And, go from there, you know, downsize from there. But, 1.25 gets a little expensive. Fittings can be a little hard too. Most people don't carry 1.25 fittings on their truck. So, y'all do. Well, you probably learned that lesson. You just don't find them everywhere, so it's better to have them on the truck. I ran my main line of the house in 1.25, which I wish I had now, because whenever it breaks, I've gotta usually go scurry to find fittings, and, it's kind of a bastard size, but it does serve its purpose, because it gives you another 7 gallons that you can run from 1 inch and, to the maximum on the 1.25 is 24. So you've got some room there if you wanted to do that. But, just remember, the main line has to be sized based on that largest valve. And then, the lateral runs, that's the piping between the valve and the heads, that will be staggered. The way we will size the pipe on the lateral lines is we will start at the furthest point and work back to the valve. We know, you know, to me, it's easier to add than to subtract, right? So if we know that we got 17 gallons through that zone, and we start working from the valve out, and we come to a half head, and it's 2 gallons, we gotta subtract 2, so we're at 15. To me, if we start at the end, and know that we got a quarter was worth 1, okay, 1 gallon, we look at the chart and say, okay, we can run up to 6 through half inch, we got 1 gallon, that's half-inch pipe. As you cross over and you get to the next head, you've added gallons, because this head was 1, the next head in line's a half, it's 2 gallons, so you've got 3 flowing through this piece of pipe. And it's gotta be sized to feed both those heads. So that next size, if you're working back to your valve, that next head you cross over, the pipe has to carry 3. Well, if you look at your chart, 3 gallons, you're still above the black line for half inch, so you can run half inch. You move back to your valve, keep going back, follow the most direct path back. As you work back, you get to another head, it's a full, so it's 4 gallons. So you had 3, all of a sudden you're at 7 gallons, because you added that 4 for that full. Now you're carrying 7 gallons through the piece of pipe that's coming up to that head. Well, we can only carry 6 through half inch, so we gotta go up to 3/4, so that piece of pipe's 3/4. So you add it up as you go back, and as you have a little offset, you add them in too. So if you have a T, you gotta pick up the head, the gallons that go off to that T. You've got another T on the other side, you gotta add the gallons that go there. So you're working back to the source, you're gathering gallons as you make intersections and as you cross where heads are. So it's just adding up, and as you add up, you just bump up in size as you cross the threshold. Half inch being 6, 3/4 being 10, 1 inch being 17. Okay, so we'll probably do that here in a minute on our plan, just kind of get a little practice, sizing pipe, but that's kind of the direction we'll go with it. He shows a little example there in the book about, you know, how to look up the chart. He's actually got a handy little chart on page 134 there at the bottom. It shows you how to use the chart to find find what size pipe, but, that's just being on the velocity side of the chart and looking at the gallonage and kind of coming up with an intersection. But the maximum safe flow, he's got that broken down, and that's a pretty handy chart. That's one of those that you don't need to remember it for the test, but as you do it enough, you will. But it's got the different, for like class 200 there in that column, it's got the different maximums that you can run through the pipe based on that velocity of 5 feet per second. He's got 10 through 3/4, 16 through 1 inch, 26 through inch and a quarter, 35 through inch and a half, and 55 through 2 inch. So those are pretty much the predominant ones. But that's a handy piece of deal, so that way you don't have to go to the chart. But you also kind of got to put them in memory, so it may be something you don't want to spend time on. But if you look at page 135, there's a kind of a layout of a small section or a couple of sections on a plan. It gives us the opportunity to size pipe. He starts at the furthest point and works back. So if you look at head A off to the right, that is, it says in the little head performance box there, the white box, it says 15-foot radius, 4-gallon full, 2-gallon half, 1-gallon quarter. All of the heads on that back row are half heads. So if you start at head A, based on the flow from the chart, that head is putting out 2 gallons per minute. So the pipe, labeled A, carrying water to that head, has to be sized in order to carry the 2 gallons. Based on that chart, based on this safe flow deal, we know we can carry up to 6, so we would just mark it as ½ inch. Now as you move back to your left, you cross head number 2. Head number 2 is also a half head, so you've gone from 2 gallons running through the pipe A to 4 gallons running to pipe B. Because pipe B has to feed water to 2 heads. So pipe B is carrying 4 gallons. If you look at the safe flow chart, we can run up to 6, so we can still run ½ inch pipe. And remember, it's just economics. 10 cents versus 17 or whatever. So, I mean, it's economics. So we're going to run ½ inch. And fittings. When you start looking at ½ inch fittings versus 1 inch fittings, there's a big difference there too. When you cross back, moving right to left, when you cross head number 3, you get to piece of pipe labeled C. It's a very short piece of pipe. It's 7.5 foot from where the head is to the intersection. And that piece of pipe has to be designed to carry water to 3 heads. Head 3, 2, and 1. All 2 gallon per minute heads, 6 gallons. So based on our chart, we can run up to 6 gallons through ½ inch pipe. So all 3 of those pieces of pipe, A, B, and C, are ½ inch in size. Okay, so we're at an intersection. Okay, let's think about the flow of water. If you look at that, you've got a valve. It's the circle with the cross in it, so you've got the valve. That valve turns on. Water's going to come from the main line through that valve. It's going to come to that T, which is not a very far distance. It's going to come to that T. Water's going to go to the right, water's going to go to the left. It's not going to go all the way down to come back. I mean, it's going to split. It takes the path of least resistance. So you've got 6 gallons going to the right, correct? Because we've said we've got 3 heads, all 2 gallons per minute, 6 gallons going to the right. We've also got to size the pipe on the left-hand side. You start at the furthest point, head 6 and work back, you've got 2 gallons. So that piece of pipe between 6 and 5 is going to be ½ inch. As you cross head 5, you've added 2 more gallons. So you're working back to that source. The source would be this intersection, because that's where the water's coming from. It comes from the pipe that comes to the T, and it goes both directions. So that, look at the intersection as a source. Where's the water coming from? If you cross 5, you've got 4 gallons. So you can still run ½ inch through that short piece of pipe there between 5 and 4. And then as you cross 4, you're at another ½ head, so you totaled 6 gallons. So both sides of those, ½ inch all the way from the T all the way out. Because on the right side you've got 6, on the left hand you've got 6. So if we know there's 6 on the right, 6 on the left, what does it have? What do we have to supply it with? No, on the pipe coming into it, we got 6 to the right, 6 to the left. We've got 12 gallons.
Yes.
And then you would size it based on that flow of 12 gallons.
Because let's say that this is just one section, all of them are gonna come up at the same time, right? All of them are coming on.
They're all coming up. That valve turns on, there's 6 heads that pop up.
6 heads, they're gonna pop up.
And that's kind of when you're looking at sizing pipe and following the flow of water, that's how you kind of got to look at it. Look at it from the furthest point back to a source. In this instance, it's just that intersection. Because you're kind of going backwards. So if you looked at it, okay, the valve turns on, boom, it comes to the T, it goes to the right, it goes to the left. But we're adding as we come back to the source. So you can do it either way, but to me, adding is easier.
So this valve was at the end, we would at the 1-inch pipeline, since we're coming back to the source. But since it's at the intersection, we use 6 and 6.
Yes, you split it. I mean, and that's a good idea, is just kind of split your valve in the middle, because the pipe will be smaller. But if you put it at the end and fed it from one long
You would have to.
run, you have 1/2 inch on the first two, the next one you have 1/2 inch, because you get to 6 gallons, and then when you got to head 4, you bump to 8, so you have to have 3/4. Then when you get to head 5, you're at 10, so you can still use 3/4, and then at head 6, you have to go 1 inch to the valve.
So it depends where you put your valve at.
Where you put your valve, it does make a difference. Center feeding like this is the best idea, because water takes the path of least resistance. If you try and force it all down a straight path, you're gonna have more friction loss, and you're gonna have larger pipe, because in that example, feeding from the end, you had 30 feet of 3/4. Because you had half, and then you had 2 3/4, and then the 1 inch. With this, you've got, what is that, 15, 30, 60, 75 foot of 1/2 inch, and then a short piece of 1 inch. So it's gonna save you a little bit of money as well. But hydraulically, you can run that whole, like this, you can run it all on 1/2 inch. Otherwise, from the end, you're gonna have to feed it with some 3/4 and 1 inch. Okay, so your main line, if it's all based on that zone number 2, the zone number 2 is 12 gallons, so your main line's gonna be 12, it's gonna have to carry, size to carry 12 gallons, and that would be 1 inch. What about the valve to the left there, zone 1? Those are all full, well, there's 2 halves and 2 fulls. Your 2 halves are 2 gallons per minute, your fulls are 4. So you've got 8 gallons in fulls, you got 4 gallons in halves, so you got 12 gallons in that section too. Basically, the 2 heads at the far left, they're gonna run off 1/2 inch. You're gonna run 1/2 inch back towards the valve to that other intersection with the 2 heads, the 2 full heads. You're gonna run 1/2 inch to both of those heads, and then going back to the valve, you're gonna run 1 inch. And it's center fed. Comes up, cross, goes both ways to the heads, comes up to the other heads, T's, and goes both ways. So that's actually a good example of center feeding as well. And then you just size your main line based on what you got, you double check, accordingly. He talks about that as we move forward, but that's how you would go about sizing the pipe in that little example. Talks about sizing remote control valves on page 137 at the bottom. When you size a remote control valve, you want to take your chart and go to the water meter / control valve or zone valve page. Water meter's on the top, valves on the bottom. When you're looking at it, he says right there in the second sentence, he says, select a valve size that has a pressure loss between 2 to 5 PSI. That's just a good working number. It usually keeps you sized correctly. Pressure loss is relatively low. When you look at what we just did, we had 2 zones that were 12 gallons apiece. If you look at your valve chart and you look down the gallons per minute till you find 12, if you look over under the 3/4, you see the loss is 7.9. It's a little high. It's higher than the 2 to 5 that it recommends. So if you move over to the right, you're at 1 inch, it's 1.8. 1.8 is under the 2, but it's better to be under the 2 than over the 5. But 7.9 is an awful lot of loss. So you size your valves as 1 inch. So keep your valves sized between 2 to 5 PSI loss. Why would you use an 1.5 inch valve in a situation like that? Well, if you look at the pressure loss through an 1.5 inch valve at 12 gallons, it really doesn't have any pressure loss, but you're gonna spend about $35 for a valve versus 12 or 13. So economics there again. trying to be cheap, we're just putting in a good system at a good price. And the 1-inch valve will do just what we need it to do. So size your valve somewhere between 2 to 5 PSI loss and you should be good. Sizing backflow devices. We're gonna use, PVBs and double checks for the most part, probably. Maybe look at RPs, but, for the most part, the PVBs and the double checks, they all pretty much have the same loss. But when you look at that chart, and even the one that's in the pressure loss charts that we've got, when you're looking at a size, let's say we're looking at a double check, DCA. You see 3/4, 1 inch, 1.5 2. So let's look at a 1-inch double check. If you scroll down underneath the 1-inch double check, you see at 10 gallons per minute, if you look to the left, you see a 5, and at 10 gallons per minute, we have 5 PSI loss. There are no losses any less than that 10 gallons per minute. So that 1-inch double check is probably not a good choice because the losses are so minimal, it may actually affect the way it works. So you want to be somewhere in, say all those 5s from 10 to, 30 gallons? You want to be in that range. If it's got a number, then you're going to be okay. If it doesn't have a number, then you're really outside its working range. So 1-inch double check from 0 to 10 gallons is not a good choice, or from 30 to 120 is not a good choice. So its working range is between 10 to 30 gallons per minute. Now, you could actually use, for 12 gallons per minute, you could use a 3/4 inch double check. It's the exact same loss as a 1 inch, and it's in the range. You know the difference? About $10. Maybe not a whole lot, but I mean, it works the same. Why not use a 3/4 and save $10? I've got some contractors do that. They'll put a metal adapter that threads in 3/4 and glues on 1 inch. It's quick and easy, and it saves them about $10. So you don't have any more loss. It's about the same size. Not a whole lot of difference all the way around. Now, you wouldn't want to use a 3/4 inch double check if you get to 20 gallons per minute because it doesn't have a loss in it. So it's not recommended to be used at that kind of flow. So that's the way you look at that chart. Just look at it. If you look at the one in the book, in the handout, you see the gallons per minute there on the left. If you've got 12 gallons per minute, just say you go to 15, just look across there. 3/4 work, 1 inch of work, either one of them. You don't want to use 1.5 inches because 1.5 inches is really, really expensive. Not for 12 gallons per minute. But there again, your double check has to be based on your largest section. So if you've got a 30 gallon per minute section and you've got a bunch of 15s, you might end up having to use a larger double check. So keep that in mind when you're balancing your sections, try and get them all pretty close to about the same amount of volume. Okay. We've already grouped heads into zones. We kind of looked at that the other day when we did the plan. We've got them sectioned off, laid out. He talks a little bit about on 143 about manifolding and center feeding. The remote control valves, that's kind of what we were addressing here a minute ago, putting the valve in the middle rather than running it from the end. The advantages of manifolding are that there are fewer valve boxes to install. There are shorter main lines, shorter wire runs, fewer potential main line or wiring repairs for future excavation work because you've got them all in a general area. And a lot of times it looks better to the homeowner. When manifolding, lateral piping should intersect the middle of the zone for even distribution, just like we talked about. Go into the middle and split, go both ways. There is a drawback to manifolding, is that it's labor intensive. It requires that you excavate a very large area. One of the things some people will try and do is they'll try and put all the T's, right there together, not leave any space to do any repairs, cut pipe or anything like that. try and fit them all into one big valve box to save money on boxes, which is totally stupid. Spread them out a little bit and use the individual boxes, you can still find them. If you do repairs on valves, you're gonna have to dig them up anyway. I never found a way around it, just because, it never fails. You try and, open a valve box and open a valve and try and get in there and service it. You drop a screw, you fill it up with water. I mean, there's always some issues. So you're gonna have to open the valve box up anyway, so don't think by putting them all in a large valve box that you're gonna be able to service them. You're probably not. So stagger them a little bit, put individual valve boxes around them, and that way you can still find them. And you don't get everything so crowded together. Makes the service nightmare if you ever have to replace a valve. Some advantages of center feeding, shorter lateral runs, better hydraulics, that's the main thing. Easier repairs and quicker installs. So depending on how you want to do it, if you're trenching, center feeding your zones and putting your valve by your zone is more recommended. Because you're cutting trenches anyway, and you just have wire runs that are out there. You waste a little bit of wire. If you're plowing or using a plow, manifolding tends to be a little bit easier because you can pull the pipe and snake the pipe below ground into the valve box, and it's a little bit cleaner. But it's really personal preference in what kind of equipment you're using as to which one you go with. Both of them work. Like I said, some have their disadvantages, some have their advantages. In the middle of the page, he says, remember this, regarding whatever you do as far as your center feeding, end feeding, manifolding, non-manifolding, that variation in operating pressure from the first to the last head in the zone should not exceed 10%. Kind of hard to measure, but what happens is if you size pipe based on the velocity of 5 feet per second, if you don't use undersized valves, stuff like that, you shouldn't have any issue staying within that 10%. Good designs, it'll work and it'll stay within that 10%. So, design step 7 gets into proper working hydraulics. So let's talk about that. We'll probably pull our plan out when we get through with this, and we'll work through doing some of the sizing and stuff like that as far as pipe and so forth. But design step 7 gets us into hydraulics. Look at the bottom of the page, pressure to design 2. That is just a general rule of thumb. You take your static pressure and you subtract 10% from it. This just allows for fluctuation is all it does. As you go through the system, or neighbors using water, whatever. If you base everything on the maximum that you have, if you have any variation, you might end up with a system that doesn't work correctly. So if you've got 70 pounds of pressure, base your static pressure on 63. Just take 10% away from what you read, and that's a good safe number. Design pressure on page 147, it will be on the exam in more than one way. It may just be a definition, it may be in the working principles of hydraulics, but it's one that you're going to need to know. The sum total of desired or minimum head pressure added to the total of all pressure losses. It's a stated pressure indicating the minimum pressure required if the system is to operate properly. So if you were to design it and put it on paper, you do the calculations, the guys go out there, they know that they better have X amount of pressure in order to make it work when they check static, in order for it to operate properly. Actual head pressure, that's operating pressure measured at the base of a sprinkler head. Its actual head pressure is calculated by deducting all pressure losses from the static water pressure. So, the constant between the two definitions, total of all pressures lost. When you do a hydraulic calculation, that's what you're doing. You're totaling up pressure loss from point A to point B. When you find it, then you can do one of these two calculations depending on which one you're asking you to do. Actual, take your total loss and subtract it from static pressure. Design, take your total loss, add it to what the manufacturer says they need. Okay, so when we do a hydraulic calculation, we're finding total loss. That's the main thing. And then we can work these two definitions based on what the total loss is and what they want to know. Some things he says about doing a hydraulic calculation in the middle of the page, the dark bold there, he says the most taxed zone is the zone flowing the most gallons per minute. So if you've got one that's 18, one that's 12, one that's 11, 18 would be the most taxed. And or the longest distance from the source of water. Or the highest elevation. So three things to take into consideration when you're going to do a pressure loss calculation. The furthest zone. If the furthest zone works, 90% chance the rest of them are going to work. If the heaviest zone works, pretty good chance the rest of them are going to work. Because the more water you flow through a section, through valves, through pipe, the more loss you have. Now, if you make your furthest zone your heaviest zone, and it works, then definitely all the rest of them work. You really don't want to make your furthest zone from the valve your heaviest. You prefer your heavier zones to be closer to the meter. I said valve. You want your heavier zones to be closer to the source, to the meter. So if you're in the backyard and you've got one that's 15, one that's 16, and then you're 18 to 20 at the front, then you're better off because it doesn't travel as far. Distance will hurt you. High volume, high gallons per minute will hurt you. So make sure that you take that into consideration when you're grouping heads together in zones. So three things to look for: the furthest, the heaviest, and the one that's got most elevation. Most residential, regular residential type stuff does not have a whole lot of elevation. So it may not come into play. If it's a large property, commercial, and there's some elevation on it, then you might want to take it into consideration. Remember, pressure's lost due to elevation at a rate of 0.433 pounds per foot. You've got 20 foot of elevation from point A to point B. 20 times 0.433 is 8.6 pounds of loss. That could be significant. We don't see it much in residential. Most of them are pretty flat. And 4 or 5 feet is not really something to worry about. So just be aware of elevation as an issue. But the main two things are the distance and the gallons per minute. Some rule of thumbs, he says here at the bottom, when you're working hydraulics in the field with exercises, there are a couple of rule of thumbs to remember. And these sound confusing. Hopefully after we work through a few of them, they tend to kind of sink in. First one, you want to take the most direct route from the point in question back to the city main or the point in question. Now, when they ask questions about hydraulics, they can ask them a couple of different ways. They can ask from the meter, which is your source, to head A. So the meter would be point in question, head A would be the other point in question. So they're giving you, between these 2 points, what are we looking at? They can ask it from the valve to head A. So it narrows down your scope. It takes out a few things, but still you're looking from one point to another. What is the loss between these two? Okay, so the most direct route from the point in question to the city main or what would be considered the other point in question. Case 2 is confusing. Hang with me. We'll hopefully clarify it as we go along. Pick up the gallons per minute at intersections. Leave the pipe alone. Now, just a minute ago when we were sizing pipe, we did from right to the middle to the T. We added them up, right? There's gallons on that left-hand side. So if we're doing a pressure loss calculation from the point in question to the, let's say the meter, city meter, we come up, just like that one we had a minute ago, we come up, we go through the valve, we come to that T. The most direct route to the head A is to the right. So you have this L, basically, is what you have. From the city main to that head, most direct route. As you work back, as you count gallons coming back, when you get to that T, you've got a commitment of gallonage to this side over here. But it's not on the most direct route to this head. But the gallons has to be considered because it's going through this main line coming up to the T. So you pick up the gallons at intersections, but you don't worry about doing a loss on the pipe. Because when we started head A, just like we did a minute ago, we had 2 gallons through half-inch pipe. We'll figure a loss on 2 gallons through 15 foot of half-inch pipe. When we cross to head B or head number 2 to pipe B, we'll look at pipe B. It's 15 foot long, it's half-inch pipe, and it's got 4 gallons going through it. So we have to do a loss on it. So we'll have all these little incremental pieces to the puzzle. And that's what hydraulics is. It's not hard, it's learning the process. And that's what takes people the most time, is following the flow of water, getting the route right, making sure you add the gallons. So in this one, as you come back to that intersection, you pick up this other 6 gallons, but you only calculate the loss through this pipe. You don't calculate the loss going over these heads, because doesn't matter. We want the most direct route to that head, okay? Confusing, we'll work through some. There'll be plenty to work through. Stay focused on the direction of the flow of water. So make sure that you're following it to the source. There will be some instances where you'll come across the line, and you'll have these losses. You'll come down because you hit a T. You'll go down towards the valve. You'll turn back to the right, and then you'll go back down to the bottom. So following the flow and calculating the gallons that required out of each of those pieces of pipe can be a little bit difficult. But hopefully we can narrow our vision down and say, okay, this is what we're looking at. This piece of pipe is carrying water to here, here, and here. This one's carrying it to here, here, and here. And make sure that we get the right gallonage through each piece of pipe, because that becomes critical when we're figuring the loss. Keep in mind, number 4, if the type of pipe, if the size, and or the gallons per minute vary in a section of piping, you will have to input a separate calculation. So just like that first one, we had a piece of half-inch, 1 head, 2 gallons per minute, 15 foot long. That's one calculation in itself. Because the size stayed the same, length stayed the same, but the gallons per minute changed once we crossed over head number 2. We have to do a separate loss. Because there's more loss through 4 gallons a minute through half-inch pipe than there is for 2 gallons through half-inch pipe. So anytime something changes, we've got to do a different calculation. Okay, the chart that we'll work through, will help us organize our thoughts. Okay, you're seeing a chart right there on page 148, 149. That's a hydraulic calculation table. I've got one that's a little cruder, but it's a little simpler. It doesn't have some of this stuff in it. And I don't know that you need all this to do the calculations for the test, but we'll get one that's pretty simple, and they don't give you these charts, so you're gonna kind of need to commit it to memory. And if you look at the top, not the very top, but it's kind of the opening there at the white part, you've got lateral pipe section A, whatever, B, C, D. Okay, the lateral pipe. You've got pipe length. You've got flow or gallons per minute. Then you've got the size. So you've got certain things that you need. You need size, length, and gallons per minute, for sure. And then you'll need to go to the chart and plug in a number and then do a calculation. So if you look across it, you'll have these columns as you go down. Size, length, gallons per minute, the loss per 100, and then an actual loss. So you'll have across there like five little squares that you'll need to make sure you get all the right information in. We'll work through those. I'll give you some charts, some simpler charts than this that's not quite as confusing, hopefully. We'll work through them. And as we get a little more proficient, we'll take the charts away and you'll do them from memory. That way, when you sit down and you have to do a pressure loss calculation, you got your blank piece of paper, size, length, gallons per minute, loss per 100, actual loss. Valve, I need the meter, I need the main line, I need the double check, hopefully you'll have all those things so ingrained in your head that it'll just, and you'll be able to fill them out. It's not rocket science, it's the method. That's the thing to do in hydraulics, it's the method. The math's really pretty easy, it's division, multiplication, subtraction, addition. It's just knowing where to put the numbers and how to get them all in the right order, okay? So that's a pressure loss chart. He goes through each line and how he does this and how he does that, what he puts on there. We're gonna simplify it a little bit, for, our purposes. He actually shows you how to use the chart to find the loss, on the backflow, and how to find the loss on the copper, all those different things. So if you wanna go back through and review those, I think it would be helpful. And he actually works through a couple of, hydraulic calculations. Towards page 157 and 158, so, trust me, we're gonna do some on our own. If you wanna look through those and just get a little better adjusted to it, go right ahead. On 159, he talks about, design step A, which is completing the design, and that's just, kind of wrapping things up. It kind of goes back over. First step is you take and do a plot plan, locate heads on the plot plan, locate the point of connection, the service, that kind of thing on there. He just kind of goes through it all. On page 162, locating the valves on the plan, piping the system, labeling the backflow, labeling everything, creating a legends on page 164. And that's a pretty good, description of what a legend, some of the information that a legend should have in it. Your heads are gonna be identified in different ways. Spray heads are gonna be small circles, whether you leave them open or color them in. Multi-streams or single-stream rotors are gonna be bigger circles. You see the difference there. A multi-stream is a larger dark circle. A single stream is a small circle with a bigger circle around it. Just different ways to identify it. It doesn't matter how you do that, as long as you put it in a legend, so when somebody's looking at your plan, they can identify what the head is. And then, zone valves is kind of the circle with the cross in it. Backflow device is a bow tie. Controller is just a black square. Shut-off valve is a circle with an S in it. Meter is a circle with an M in it. So all those things are a part of that legend. It just helps somebody identify what we're doing. You've gotta have the scale on it. You gotta have the pressure on it. Head performance is, there at the bottom, 5 foot, spray heads, MP rotators, low angle single stream. So that gives somebody, whoever's looking at it, an idea of, the gallonage of the precipitation rates and stuff like that. So, needs to have a legend on it somewhere to identify what we're doing. And, then the hydraulics on page 166, you see where he's put together actually a hydraulic calculation table, for one of the zones in that plan that he laid out. And I believe if you look at it, zone 7 is, I think he did the one that was in the middle of the backyard, is what he did, and he did the pressure loss on it. As you look at that pressure loss chart, some things to note. There again, you've got kind of two parts to it. The top part is the section, which is on the discharge side of the valve. It's the stuff that's not under constant pressure. It's when the valve shuts off, it bleeds off, and there's no water in the line, or very little water in the line. So when you do the section part of it, it's usually pretty small. It's the path from the head back to the valve. And it's usually just includes pipe, several pieces of pipe. So you can add that up. That's the section part of it. And then you get into the valve, the main line, the double check, or the backflow. Can't say double check, we just say backflow because we don't know what it is. But backflow, the service line, the meter, all those things come into it. So if you notice, he's got it all plotted out. Ours will be similar to this. But what he does is he comes in and down towards the bottom, you see he calculates, number 21, he calculates total pressure loss. He took the top half and then added it to the stuff in the middle and ended up with about 23.46 PSI loss in running water from the city main to this head that he's looking at in zone number 8 or 7. Now, when you do the hydraulics, you're looking for design pressure and actual head pressure. In order to do design, you have to take total loss and add it to required head pressure, or minimum head pressure, which is in line 22. It said it was 25. So he took 23 pounds of loss and added it to 25 because the 25 is a loss. You need 25 pounds to make that head pop up and seal off. That becomes a loss. You don't have 25 pounds to do it, it won't work. So you take 23.46 and add it to 25, you end up with 48.46 PSI loss. So in looking at that, based on the design pressure, we need at least 49 pounds of pressure to make this system work. And when we do the calculations like that, we know, yea or nay, is it gonna work? Now, looking at it for actual head pressure, if you had static, he said static was 78 PSI. That was one thing they checked. It was given 78 minus the 23.46. It shows in 24 that it left us with 54.54 PSI. Now, at the base of that head, we've got 54 PSI. We already determined the minimum head pressure is 25. Will it work? Yeah, about 24 pounds extra, it'll work. So it'll perform really well. It'll pop up, seal off good, and it'll spray. And so we've got a little excess pressure, not too much, but we got a little at the head. So at the base of the head, we've got 54 pounds of pressure. All we need is 25. So yeah, we're good. On both cases, we're good. So that's kind of what we're shooting for when we get into hydraulics, and that's kind of a chapter 5 in a nutshell. A lot of it we'll do just kind of practical work. We'll do hydraulics, we'll do precipitation rates and stuff like that. So a good thing to do would probably, I don't know if we'll get to it on Thursday, but something good to look at the chapter 5 test. And just go through it and answer the questions you can, see where you're at. If it brings up a question, write it down. And say, hey Larry, what about number 6? You know, what are you finding there? Now, I will tell you that some of the stuff that he does is calculations. In the back of the book, he uses a different pressure loss chart than what we use. Some of his numbers will be different than if you were to use these charts. I say use these charts because we're going to need to be used to them. Work them if you want to work them with that. I've already worked them with that, so I know the difference in the number. I can tell you if it's right or wrong without looking in the book as far as the answers. So, if you want to work through those in chapter 5, that would be good practice just to start working through it. It's a long test. It's 100 and something questions, I think. It's 80 questions long, so there's quite a few there. Actually, it's more than that. It's 80 questions long, so I mean, it's just take your time, work through it, see what you can come up with. There's some good questions in there. He asked a lot of different stuff, about velocities, about friction losses and stuff like that. So he makes you go to the chart, look stuff up in the chart, and it'd be good practice to do. So look at it and see what you can come up with in your spare time or in your study time. Let's take out the plans from the other night, and let's work towards completing it, at least to the point of being ready to do a hydraulic calculation. So we should have, heads put in their pipe to it. We can size the pipe, we can label the valves. see where we're at. Okay, one of the things we want to do, we can start with this. Okay. Find your valves. Did we label the heads pretty much, or yes, no, maybe? Okay. So if you've got the heads labeled, you should be able to know the gallons per minute. What did we say on the halves? We said, on the sixes, 15s were, 15 full was 4. I don't think, we didn't have any 12s, did we?
No.
We got the sixes. I think we said they were 1 gallon. Is that right? For a full, so a half would be half a gallon, and a quarter would be 0.25. I think that's what we said. End strips were 0.75. Side and center strips were 1.5. So on those pop-up sections, in case you don't remember what the gallons was, is that right on that? Six half, 0.6, 0.27, okay. So the six half were, we didn't have any fulls, but the six halves were point, six. The 6 quarters were 0.37. So if you need to go back and add, you can. What we need to do is take the section, just start with whichever one, and add the gallons up that's in that section. So if you've got your valve, and you've got your section going this way with all your heads, and you add it up, somewhere out in the area by the valve, you'll put this little octagon. This is an octagon, it's close to it. And what that'll do is that'll allow you to know how many gallons will be going through that valve. So what you'll do is you'll put the size of the valve up on the top, and you put the gallons per minute on the bottom. So if you counted all the gallons, all the 6 halves, 6 quarters, whatever, and you come up with 7 point, you know it's a 1-inch valve, and you have 7.4 as your gallons per minute. So go through and label all the 11 valves with the size and the gallons per minute. So right out beside them, just make that kind of that little octagon looking thing, and label your valves. If you have trouble with it, just call me. I'll be walking around just making sure we're all on the same page. Thank you. So warm today. I got cold and then the sun's like that.
say on the?
I guess the other day, I thought you said don't touch the line, so I can move around, but I just have to think. That was supposed to be.
Yeah.
I thought it was 1.7.
That's what. It was half.
Okay, this is sorry about that. I don't really know how to connect them.
Okay, these are fine, but you've got, these are all connected together, because they're, that little side yard's running together. These are all connected together, because they're all pop-ups. I think we said a zone here and a zone here.
So draw a line there and there?
Mm-hmm, yep.
Okay.
Connect.
I thought you said it was 1.7. That's what I have wrote down here.
Full,
1.7, this water.
full is up to 3.4, and then the half should be half of that, so it's gonna be,
4 is 3.4.
3.4, yeah, on the 3,000. Yeah, see right there, 3.4, you had it on that one, so the fulls are 3.4.
Oh, okay.
And then halves are 1.7, and those are 0.8.
0.43?
0.43, yeah. So then you just add them all up, so you got that one, you know, one full, bunch of halves, and a bunch of quarters, add them up, and then you've got a total, yeah. Where your zone, where your valves, so your valves here.
Well,
Just say-
actually, at the bulb is, for this is.
Oh, okay.
And
That
this
one's
is the
the
bulb for the, for the
Okay,
drip. For the
okay,
drip.
so yeah, just like in the driveway, you can put it, there's size and then gallons per minute. So just add them all up and that'll give you a gallon per minute. Okay? Makes sense what we're doing with that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get all my gallons all working.
Oh, okay.
That was real easy.
Yep. Good. So you've got the sections, so that gets you the drip, right? She had two here. Because I think you run this side and this side, so I think you put them all on one, did you? Did you get them all on one? Okay, so you set another one for this side. Yeah, it's gonna be so small, that's what I do, is just bring your line up. Show it for this side. Just a regular line? Just a dotted line. That way it doesn't have a big red line. And then we
2000s.
Esa la luz como se chupa.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's 2000 right here. And then we got another 2000. We got 3000s right here. 3000s over here. 3000s over here. See, I already had it. Like the 3000, got 0.85 for quarters. Quarters are. Still missing heads right here. Missing a head right there and a head right here.
And this one's a 1,000.
Yeah. That's why I got 0.25. But then say,
Just the 1,000.
yeah,
Yeah, 0.25 times 1, because we only have one.
it kinda got me confused with it.
Okay.
We got 2000s, one piece, 2000s over here,
Okay.
remember? And then we got 3000s over here.
Okay, 2000s are different than the 3000s,
Yeah,
so.
this is why 2000s, they're coming up, the quarters,
Yeah,
coming up
I think
like-
the 1.7 is probably right on that, on the.
2000s.
Yeah, 1.7, 0.85 to the halves. 0.85 to the half, to the halves.
0.85 for the quarters, ain't it?
On
The
the
3000s.
2000s are different, they don't put out as much
2000s, I got, 1.43.
on the quarters.
Yes. I think is what it has. Yeah, right there. So I got a quarter, then I wrote
On the
1.43
2000.
on the 2000s.
2000, yeah, should be 0.43 for the quarters. Yeah, 1.7, 0.43 on the quarters, and 0.85 on the halves.
85 on the halves.
0.6 on the half, 1.6. 1.7 on the quarters, 0.6 on the halves,
So this,
and the 2000.
2000's 0.6.
And then 0.43 on the quarters. So those would be 0.43. Yeah, that was gonna be 0.8, the 0.6, because it's a half. Actually, 0.6, quarters are 0.43, fulls are 1.7.
1.7. This one is 0.6.
Yeah. And 43. 0.6. That's gonna act as a
Yeah,
half.
that's the half. 0.6. And this quarter is gonna go with it, right?
Yeah, it'll be with it too, and I just do it as a regular quarter, 0.43.
1.43.
Yeah, 0.43, yeah.
Maybe just go ahead and add them all up.
Yep, add them all up, and then just put your little symbol right there and show how many gallons it is.
What chart do we use for the sewer? Is it for the valve, right?
Yeah, that's gonna be, well, it's a, this is for the valve, that's just, as you, it tells them the gallons and the,
Cause I added all this right here, and I got 6.9.
okay, so valve is,
Right here.
okay, so I would probably set it right here out of the way, and then, just make that. Just write it in
you have the gallons on the section, you can easily determine the size of the tank.
We can be less than 2.5, right?
You can be, yeah. You just, as long as it's got a B's right here, because it doesn't have a number of things, you won't be
As
there.
long as we don't go over 5.
Yeah. A little is okay, but not, I wouldn't go over that. That's a general rule, 2 to 5, general rule. Okay? So once you add them up, since you got that one, put your deal, put the gallons, and then look here, find out what size, verify what size it is.
Okay, because these are all valves, right? Remote control valves.
Yeah. Put this one down here low, and this one up here, that way they're all right there, you know which one's which.
Well, now that we went over, the split to get less, what do you call it?
Friction loss?
Friction loss. Will these valves be better, maybe the drip irrigation kind of right here in the middle?
You could, but because your main line's here, it may be easier to put them all close to the main line. Because all this is not pressurized. If you move it up here, you got pressurized line all the way through the joint. So you'll figure out a way as you, the more you do it, you do it.
So this valve is for this zone right here, so it's gonna split off the water to go this way, right? And then water comes this way.
Yep,
So this water will come up to this,
yep.
and then keep that right here.
Yeah, because I mean, it's all, I mean, this, I mean, if you're working back, so if this is not tied together. Stop here, probably work this way, because I'm pretty sure I'm back to it, you will figure it out here, because that'd be the furthest way away.
Cause this one's on it too, right?
Yeah.
So this one's further than that one?
Yeah, just distance wise, probably for five, probably
Taylor.
6 1 will have a decimal.
Taylor.
Do either one of them.
Taylor.
Oh, okay.
Can I borrow your eraser? Thanks.
Oh, these right here, these are the 6 foot, right?
Yep.
How many heads are we supposed to have for some reason? I think I did it with 5, and I did it with like 32. I know it's probably wrong.
That wrong?
That's all right, I mean, there's a bunch in there.
I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Supposed to be over 6, right?
Yeah, so this one was part, so. Yeah, so some of these are probably on the top
Here you go.
down a little bit.
Thank you.
I wouldn't go back and raise it. See, that one's about 6, that one's 5. So each other's probably a little closer, probably good through here, and a little closer.
Yeah.
Let's go down. This side, actually, pretty much is straight. Yeah, see, it's all pretty good shape. So it's just, I think,
This side of
cut
that.
off a little bit there. See? Yeah, kind of twist a little bit as it goes down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So right in there, it looks like you got a little, probably need a head in there and space it out, but.
And these right here, these are the end strips and center
End
strips.
strips are end strips are here,
Mm-hmm.
center strips are there.
And how much is those sprayed?
1.5 on the centers and the ends are 0.75.
1.5
Yeah,
on the end?
in the middle, the centers and sides are 1.5. The ends are 0.75.
How much do they spray apart?
They're about 15 foot apart. 15 foot end strip, 15 foot side strip.
I got a question real quick. What did you say these 10s were?
Q. Like a 10 half, 10 full is 1, so a half would be 2, and the 40 will be 0.25. Let's see what I got here. Actually,
My numbers, I don't think these are right. That's the 3,000,
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's right.
the 2,000.
1.7, 0.85, 0.43. 1,000, so. That look right.
Okay.
Hey, on that, zone by the pool equipment, did you get 12.5 gallons per minute?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
12.5, and it's supposed to be 11, 12.
It ain't gonna kill you one way or the other. It's not that in exact science. Yeah, you'll be good. Because you're still under your pipe size, you're still under your valve, so.
And this one here, I only got like 4.5 gallons.
That very well could be true, because all you're doing is just taking a general, like a length here, so your longest length. Usually what I do, like, so if I had 30 feet and I had 8 of them, so 30 times 8 would be 240 feet. If I had 20 feet
I'm
times
talking about
8.
this one
Oh,
here.
that one?
And that's, the other day they said we had 7.7 gallons per minute. And I only come up with 4.55. Add them all up, see what I did. I got 5 quarters. Right? I come up to 2.15, and then I got 4 heads. Came up to 2.4.
And then you got the
Add 'em up.
1.7 to the full. That'd be 7, that's 7.9. No, that's probably where you get that 7.7.
On the drip irrigation, did we calculate how many gallons per minute?
But the way you did drip, I just do an average, so if we're looking at, let's say this right here.
Mm.
So we're looking at roughly, we got 34 feet, 35
So
feet,
this one right here?
so 35 feet. And let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 10. Yeah, there's some of them that are shorter than others, but we're just, for an average, we got 350 feet there.
Mm.
So, when you look at this, you got 15, and then just say you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 15 times 8, so you just, that's how you kind of, you're coming up with a, just a rough average, you gotta do these two, it's all time together.
gallons per hour, gallons per minute, just divide by 60, but, in order to calculate, that's just kinda, you come up with a rough number.
So we find total linear feet.
Total linear feet, multiply it by your gallons per hour, divide by 60. So, the times your gallons per hour, yeah, times your.
And our gallons per hour is, 0.9, you said, right?
So you don't have to be exact, that's why I said just a rough number, is
Mhm.
close enough. But you're gonna have some, you know, you're gonna have some variation in the flower beds or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe a little extra, maybe a little waste, who knows?
I'm not gonna, connect these.
Run one down this side, cause, see, you're connecting this one to these.
Oh.
See, this is a pop-up, that's a pop-up, so this one connects to this one. This connects down here and there, so you'd have a line here, here, and then across the middle. Like a little H out of it. Your variation? I don't know, sitting in there, to be honest with you. Okay, what you would do is, you just, okay, so we've got an emitter every foot. So if we come up with a linear footage, we know that we've got an emitter every foot, so we have one emitter per linear foot, right? Then you can multiply that by your gallons per hour per emitter, so they would 0.9. So just, what I typically do is I'll say, okay, what I got here, I got 105 feet roughly, doesn't have to be exact. And how many rows do I have? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, looks like 8 rows, 105 times 8. Okay, so you've got 140, or 840 feet roughly. Okay, multiply that by 0.9, because you got one every foot. Okay, so 756 gallons per hour divided by 60. Gallons per hour converted to gallons per minute, so you've got 12 gallons running through it. 12.6. So you're missing some here. I mean, we counted 8, but, you know, the last 4 are shortened here, so you're gonna, I mean, it's a general number. You're not breaking the bank by being a little over 12. You do the same thing here, just say I've got, my medium run is 20 feet, and I've got 16 of them, so you got 320 feet here. Do the same here, add those up, see what you got, and then multiply it by the 0.9 divided by 60. Yeah, 320. Yeah, just kind of find one that's in the middle. 80 feet, 60 feet. Okay, and you just count how many you've got roughly there going across.
So the 2,000 be the same as 2,000?
That would be different, 2,000 is a little less.
I know you told me that, that was all be the same as you told me on that. I'm pretty sure last time we said 2,000 for that.
That makes sense on how to do that. On the drip. Okay.
So on the drip, I got 11 gallons a minute, so 1 inch pipe, is that right?
And it'll all, I mean, everybody draws a little bit differently, so yours may be 11, his may be 12, so it's just a general number,
Yeah.
just a general number.
Where am I gonna cross this right here?
Just anywhere, doesn't matter, you just gotta connect them. They don't run by themselves, if they gotta run together. And you put the valve right there in the middle, that'll control them.
So since all the meters are pretty much, or the valves are 1 inch, we do like 1 1/4 inch for the main line.
Okay, what's your largest valve? Okay, as far as gallonage. Okay, so if you look at your PVC, now that's the copper, I bet. If you look at PVC, your main line's gonna be based on that 12.6 gallons.
Was
It
it
should be 1 inch.
9 what, gallons per minute on the drip?
Are you on the copper chart?
Yeah.
Okay, put the PVC chart for
9.9?
the main line or the surge line, okay, the surge line, yes, yes, yeah, it needs copper. Is it not given to you? Yeah, PVC, type K, 1 inch copper.
Multiply
So
that
it's given, you don't
total
have to do
linear,
anything about it.
linear feet by 9.9?
Point nine. Point nine. And then divide by 60. So your copper, I mean, it's given to you. You don't have, I mean, there's not really anything other than for your hydraulic calculation, there's nothing that you need that for.
Surge line, main line, right?
No, the main line's different. The main line goes from the meter to the back of the valves. That's the broken line, the dashed line on the plan. It should come, on the right side, should come up, go across the front yard. To the left side, go all the way to the back. That should be PVC, yes, and it's gonna be sized based on the largest section of the yard, which is the 12.
Yeah. You're under that 5, so yeah. 12 shouldn't be a problem for a 1 inch main line. Yeah. And what I would do is you go through there just every so often, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, just label it that way. There's no confusion. Just
Doesn't have to be every piece, but just quite a few.
On this, is it gonna be like this?
Okay, these are rotaries, so they're gonna be different than these. You don't tie the two together. So you've got these 15-foot pop-ups tied with this side, so it's kinda like this. You'll have these 3, and then these 4 tied together and cross in the middle.
Do we have to label the pipe too?
We won't do all of it, but we'll do a section or two just to get comfortable with it here in just a minute.
Like on this one right here, it's coming off the main line right here, right? To the valve.
To the valve, okay.
And then from here, I need to decide what pipe I'm gonna run.
Well, based on the gallons that's going through it, so you start at the point and work back, because this is not carrying, this, the 6.25, it's only carrying
What I
0.6.
did on this one, I ran it all the way across like that, and run it up to this one and into this one, because we got the tree right here.
Mhm. So you work back from your furthest point to the source.
Okay,
So this piece of pipe right here is only carrying that many gallons.
0.6.
In this one, you gotta add
Add
this
that
to this to see what's in
To
here.
see, find out what kind of, what size pipe we're
This
gonna,
is,
still gonna
yeah.
need.
And as you come back, you know, you've gotta, as you're going this way, as you cross here, you gotta add all these in there. And across here, you gotta add, so this pipe carries water to this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. So you gotta add them all up, so it's easier to add going back
Okay,
than it is to subtract, knowing that you started with 6.25 and subtract every so often. You start at the furthest point and work back to your valve.
okay. So, I add these,
First, you did your pipe, just do piece by piece. So this is your first piece of pipe. It's 0.6.
0.6.
All you gotta do is look at your chart and know that you gotta be able to size it for the 0.6 gallons per minute, which is one.
One inch?
No, it's 1 gallon, because
I mean,
you
1
don't have
gallon.
0.6, so where's your chart? Okay, on the pipe, PVC pipe. Okay, so this piece carries 0.6,
Mm-hmm.
1 gallon. So we wanna stay under 5 feet per second velocity. So we can do that with 1/2 inch without a problem.
Okay.
So we're under that black line, so it's 1/2 inch.
So these would be half
Just
inch.
label that piece of pipe as 1/2 inch. Okay, now we're following it back.
Mhm.
Water goes, coming from this direction, so this piece of pipe carries water to that head and that head, so you've gotta add those two together. 0.6 to, is it 0.43?
6.64 and 0.643.
It should be 1.43, I think. So 0.6 plus 0.43.
0.6 plus 0.43.
Uh-huh.